Welcome everyone to the commentary for Chapter 5 of Fawn Brodie's brilliant biography of Joseph Smith, No Man Knows My History. Chapter 5 was the chapter that goes into detail about the various ways and events that influenced the coming forth of witnesses for Joseph Smith's emerging text, the Book of Mormon. One of the things that this chapter brought home for me is my observation that Fawn Brodie, as I suppose any historian ought to emulate, is excruciatingly fair. There are so many parts of the book so far and in this chapter where I kind of just want her to use her brilliant use of language and her clever wit to just kind of dunk on Joseph Smith a little bit more. But she is so good at restraint. She is a master of only letting us know her true feelings through carefully veiled and precisely planned language. So just a word or here that colors our interpretation of what she's saying about Joseph Smith to let us know kind of her own doubts about his prophetic origins. And there are definitely times where I wish she was more explicitly against, because she's so smart, so intelligent, and I would love to hear her kind of roast him a little bit more. But I guess she's more mature than I am. So, Fawn Brodie makes a really good point that regardless of if the Book of Mormon is historical or not, regardless of if Joseph Smith translated it or he wrote it just out of his own noggin, the fact of the matter is this is an incredibly important and influential piece of religious literature that has influenced the lives of millions of people. And in the first paragraph of this chapter, it's pointed out that several 100,000 people immigrated from Europe to America in the 19th century to join this movement. So we may come to the conclusion ourselves that the book is fake, or it's certainly boring. But the fact is, it has changed a lot of people's lives for better or worse. I remember reading it for the first time cover to cover when I was a freshman in my college dorm room, and just feeling really spiritually intrigued by it, coming to pray and realizing that I felt like the book was true, not because my parents told me it was, but because something inside of me suggested that there was truth to be found in this book. And then that led me to serving a mission, a 2-year proselyting mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it has certainly changed my life. In retrospect, of course, I recognize myself as being the victim of childhood indoctrination, and that while I don't want to invalidate the conclusion that other people have come to, that the Book of Mormon is a true or spiritually satisfying book, I recognize now that if I had not been raised in the church to believe the things that I believed, I probably would have come to a different conclusion about the Book of Mormon, and would have focused on more of the things that were happening in 2013 culture that maybe would have tethered me more to the reality of my current world. One of the issues that we get into from the get-go is this idea of the Book of Mormon being a historical record of the Nephites, or it being a ostensibly American piece of literary fiction. The apologists today will look at the kind of complaints that are made in the CES letter about the Book of Mormon and say, well, the Book of Mormon was so powerful because it was able to answer these questions that people were having in the religious discourse of that region. From my standpoint, and from the viewpoint of many others, it just seems so abundantly clear that the Book of Mormon is not history, but is just Joseph Smith riffing on his own theological insights into those conversations that were being held. And I think many people view Joseph Smith as being pretty brilliant and being pretty precocious in being able to distill truth and valuable insight about things that have dogged the Christian world in discourse for since the beginning of that religion. And so we need to give Joseph Smith a little bit of credit in the sense that, real or not, the Book of Mormon does challenge a lot of existing viewpoints and offers new insight into questions about Christian theology. So there's certainly a restoration, if not in original Christian truth, then there's at least the birth and emergence of varied viewpoints from a distinctly American point of view that challenge mainstream threads in European Catholicism as well as Protestantism. One thing, I just can't get over the fact that, as Fawn Brodie says, quote, its matter is drawn directly from the American frontier, from the impassioned revivalist sermons, the popular fallacies about Indian origin, and the current political crusades. My question for honest, earnest believers of the Book of Mormon is, how could the Nephites be having these same conversations? It's just too convenient for me, at least, to accept the fact that all of these things that were so regionally specific and chronologically specific to Joseph Smith's time and place, how are the Nephites building a society with political structures that did not exist until the Revolutionary period at the end of the 18th century? How are they able to have these religious discourses about theological arguments that didn't exist until, or at least in the abundance they existed in upstate New York of the early 1800s? Now, the faithful response to that is God, in all of his wisdom, has provided a way through which all of us can receive answers to questions about our day. That the Book of Mormon, the Book of Mormon was brought forth specifically for our day, and it talks about that in the Book of Mormon, that's why it's coming forth, is because we need it. The counter argument to that is, well, gee, sure, that may have worked for Joseph Smith, but if the Book of Mormon was written to kind of close the gap in our existing theological knowledge between the Bible and everything else, it just doesn't seem sufficient, because there are still so many things raging in the Christian community. One of the biggest ones in my lifetime, having been born in 1995, is this idea of accepting LGBTQ plus individuals as Christians, or sticking to the relatively new mainstream point of view in evangelical Christianity that the God's plan is man and woman only, and people that identify as LGBTQ plus are living in sin. That is just one example of a question that the Book of Mormon just does not talk about. It does not. It is not. What it does say is, Alma talks to his son, I think in Alma chapter 39, 40, 38. He's having these conversations with his son, and he talks about how breaking the law of chastity is the sin next to murder. And you can imagine the psychological toll that takes on a young 12-year-old learning. If you're a young boy, of course, you'll be in the deacon's quorum for Sunday school. If you're a young lady, then you'll just be in the young women's program. But you can imagine, this is something that had a huge impact on me growing, hitting puberty, discovering myself sexually, and then you're going to church and saying, hey, these urges that you have, if you express them in any other way than a marriage between man and woman, a single partner, then you have committed a sin that is essentially on the same level as murder. There's a problem there. Anyways, I digress. The point being is, it sure seems convenient that the Nephites had all of these conversations and histories that center around the exact discourse that was occurring in Joseph Smith's time and place. So, whether you want to assume that God chose a prophet who would be able to write the book in that way to answer those questions and make a mark on contemporary Christianity, or whether you want to assume more cynically that this is a dude trying to get a book published to save his impoverished family, using his ingenuity and craftsmanship to build this narrative from the ground up. I'll leave that to you, but I think for me the evidence reads pretty clearly of the latter. It's convenient that talks about how, again, he's gotten so far into this project, spent hours and hours, has successfully convinced many other people at this point to join in his project in various ways and means, and then basically people are starting to come up with a different origin. We got to remember from previous chapters that Joseph Smith originally was interested in writing and profiteering from writing a book about the origin of the Indians, because that was something that was the people were very interested in answering that question. It was looming large in that community. And so when people start saying, well, hey, wait a second, it's actually more likely that there have been indigenous people on this part of the earth since like the flood. Again, this was back in a time where people like assumed that the Old Testament was just taken for granted. And so there was a lot of chronology based on those things. So people say, well, I think the Indians actually came from a long, long time ago, and that did not jive with Joseph Smith's existing framework of the 600 BC to 480,000 year stretch. So he puts the Book of Jared in. The Book of Jared has a lot of problems. The submarine, the boats, the little football boats that they build. There's been a ton of work on the internet. I think John Larson's podcast, How to Build a Transoceanic Vessel, from the Mormon Expressions podcast, is kind of seen as the magnum opus of dunking on that absolutely ridiculous idea that thousands of years ago they built football submarines that were filled with bees and all manner of creatures that were pre-Columbian. And oh man, I just sound stupid. I feel like I have to go wash my mouth out for saying something so silly. And people genuinely believe this, right? There are people that have PhDs that are writing apologetic responses to this sort of stuff. It's just, in my opinion, what a waste of a life. So yeah, the Book of Jared is, the other thing for me is, in the Book of Jared, there's the story of the princess or whatever dancing, for the noble people. It basically just like it's just such a lazy copy of Salome from the New Testament dancing for the King Herod. It's just like, why would you put something that is so obviously just like a copy paste? It does not. I remember being a faithful missionary reading that and being like, gosh, that just doesn't make any sense why anyone would do that. So, for what it's worth, the ego of Joseph Smith, I think, is pretty massive. I think it's pretty obvious that even if he was super genuine, this is just a dude that really sees himself as a choice seer. That is, he writes himself into the Book of Mormon. He didn't have to do that. And again, depending on how cynical you are, it just seems so convenient that he's got this scripture saying that there's a guy that would be named Joseph after the name of his father, and he would become a great prophet, and go, oh, it's Joseph Smith. That's so amazing. I'm not buying it. I do not buy it for a second. So one of the things that we talk about as we learn more a little bit about how the witnesses came to give their testimony of the golden plates and the coming forth of the Book of Mormon is that Fawn Brodie says, and I agree, that it's actually maybe the people that were early adopters of Joseph Smith's restorationist viewpoint perhaps are more interesting than Joseph Smith himself, because it's beyond a shadow of a doubt that Joseph Smith was wildly charismatic and could basically charm just about anyone except for the most curmudgeonly of people. But even still, I mean, this is not just people saying, hey, I don't know if I agree with the guy, but he sure knows how to charm people. It goes beyond that. You've got Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer. You've got these people going out in the woods, praying, and seeing visions. I mean, that's a whole new level. I think I'm a pretty charming guy. I can carry a conversation well with people. I think most people find me tolerable, if not fun to be around. But I don't think in my wildest dreams that I could successfully convince anyone that not only I had seen a vision, but they were right in front of me also experiencing the same vision. So I don't know how we did that. It's unclear. What is clear is that obviously these were people that were in a society where the kinds of things Joseph Smith was talking about was common. Again, this goes against the narrative that Joseph Smith was like seeing a vision that was so different than everyone else. There were thousands of people saying, hey, I went out into the woods and I saw God, or I heard the voice of God. Joseph Smith's first vision is promoted by Mormons as being this spectacularly unique circumstance. But we know now that that's just not the case. Almost everyone was having it. It was having a vision or hearing the voice of God or hearing the Spirit move upon you was ubiquitous in the world Joseph Smith grew up in. It is as common as driving a car to a commute in America, or having milk with your Oreos. Like, it's not that special. So it is interesting. There is this idea of clout. Joseph Smith's name is starting to get thrown around, and there are people that opposed him. We'll get into that in a second, but there were people that were in on it. You've got, it says there was a rivalry that sprang up among Joseph's patrons. You've got Joseph Knight bringing a wagon load of provisions 30 miles to help Joseph Smith. And not to be outdone, David Whitmer's dad says, oh, hey, I will give you free room and board if you come do it here. This is the same impetus that I think, the same motivation that people have to put their name on institutional buildings. If you're giving your wealth to an institution so that they slap your name on a conference hall or whatever, I don't know if that's doing it for the right reasons. I think it's usually to avoid paying taxes, honestly. But this quasi-philanthropic stuff, I don't know. But this is definitely happening with Joseph Smith. People are interested in helping out, which again proves that, real or not, the Book of Mormon was absolutely, had this almost magnetic pulse about it that people felt drawn to. And then, we get the story of David Whitmer's wife that is basically exasperated. She's got all these kids running around. She's the only one cooking and cleaning and making clothes and all that good stuff. And then her family, the men in the family, are getting involved with Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon, and they're probably taking up valuable space in their area to do the translation process. And so she has every reason to have a really bad taste in her mouth regarding Joseph Smith, and yet she, of her own volition, comes to these people and claims that she has had a sure witness that the work they're doing is good and that Joseph Smith is a prophet. If you're Joseph Smith, how do you react to that? how would you react in your life if someone you knew, that not necessarily a friend, but maybe like an acquaintance, a coworker, pulled you aside during a lunch break and said, "Hey, I know this is crazy, but I've just had a voice speak to me that was not my own voice, saying that you are a prophet, you are someone meant to guide our community towards salvation." I mean, this is madness. So Joseph Smith has this giant ego, and he uses all sorts of tactics to, quote, spiritual exercises to get people to have the visions he wants them to have. But this is the case of someone coming out of the woodwork to say, "No, you don't even have to prime me. I have had a vision myself." So this stone is rolling. It doesn't seem to be rolling a whole lot in the 21st century, but there was a lot of excitement happening. I think that's really interesting. The testimony of the 3 and 8 witnesses as published in the Book of Mormon, I just wanted to say about this, that totally worked for me, as a freshman in college, wrestling with the question of whether I should drop out of college to serve a mission, which I did ultimately decide to do. One of the reasons is because they've got this really strong testimony. It's got this really powerful language. It's not this equivocating, like the apostles, "Have you seen Jesus?" "Well, I don't want to disclose the sacred nature of my intimate experiences, but I testify that." It's like, quit the BS. These testimonies are like, we have seen it. We want everyone in the world to know that we believe Joseph Smith is good. And I guess I was naive at the time, but I just really felt strongly that why would someone put their name to this document and allow this to be published if they weren't sincere? And I'd like to believe that most, if not all of them, were sincere. But as the book explains, if you read through the lines, there's a lot of really troubling things. The one that I think is the most troubling is this story with the larger group of witnesses, in which Joseph Smith basically got everyone together, set them to, quote, continual prayer and other spiritual exercises. We know, I'm not a psychologist by any means, but we do know in the modern scientific literature that certain deprivations can alter our human consciousness. So being hungry, going without water, or otherwise fasting in the religious sense, it's not just about not eating the food in terms of like denying yourself. That's part of it. But another part of it is because one of the reasons that Mormons fast and other religions do too is that the process of fasting, that depriving your body of its normal nutrients, can alter your consciousness and lead to what people perceive as being higher levels of spiritual awareness or contact with worlds beyond the world of our normal day-to-day lives, in which we are truly fully nourished. And again, that was food and water, but also sleep deprivation. There are many accounts of people, very secular people, who, it happens a lot in the military, where people are out at sea in the Navy on a boat and working these crazy shifts, going 24, 36, 48 hours without sleeping sometimes. And then they'll start to hallucinate because of sleep deprivation. So this is indisputably happening with Joseph Smith. He is, when it says spiritual exercises and continual prayer, again, mantras like chanting. That's one of the big things that happens with chanting, is you can put yourself in a trance. And so this idea of some hypnosis happening this is really troubling to me, or at least really strong evidence that we don't have to take their witness at full value. Because I think if we were in the room and Joseph Smith has this empty box and calls you an idiot for not seeing the plates and to get on your knees and humble yourself, at some point you're probably just going to want to say, "Oh yeah, I see the plates," so you can get out of there because you're bored, tired, hungry, or whatever. Or, more... let's consider everyone there wanting to see the plates. Yes, if I could absolutely see if you're chanting, if you're deprived of your sleep or other basic nourishment, at a certain point you are going to alter your consciousness to where you could see things that are not materially present in the real tangible space. But I think this story of Joseph Smith, it's kind of brilliant. It's just kind of insidious that he shows them the empty box and then chastises them for them being the ones without enough faith to see it. This is just, I don't think this is the kind of behavior that is becoming of someone who has done more for the salvation of mankind than Jesus Christ. And that's from the scriptures. That's not me talking. That is what people believed about Joseph Smith, is that he is this upstanding paragon of moral virtue. And I think this episode of the hypnotizing the witnesses through spiritual exercises, it just seems really unhealthy, and it seems manipulative. And if someone did that to me, hopefully I would have the strength of consciousness and strength of mind and moral character to object. It is interesting to note that as the Book of Mormon was commissioned through Egbert E.B. Grandin for $3,000 for 5,000 copies of the book, it is, I think, I didn't know this, that there were a group of concerned citizens in Palmyra that openly decided to collectively unite and boycott the book. So as many people as were excited, there was still a growing population of people that knew Joseph Smith, and for every people that were having visions saying that Joseph Smith was a confirmed prophet, there were just as many people that were praying and using their logical faculties to come to the conclusion, holy cow, this guy is a quack. We really need to defend our families, our children against these teachings so as to keep them safe. So that is not something that they talk about in church resources, correlated manuals and things. But again, for every Martin Harris and Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer, there were disgruntled people who were having none of it. And I love that later in Mormon history, Mark Twain, one of the most important American authors since the Revolutionary War, Mark Twain spent a lot of his time writing about his experiences in going to Salt Lake and meeting Mormons in Nevada and things like that. So I love that we have a strong person in our corner saying, hold on, not only is this weird, a lot of it's really messed up. Another really questionable moment for Joseph Smith, in my opinion, is this revelation that he has to Martin Harris. So Joseph Smith is out of money. They are basically screwed if they can't come up with the money to get the publisher the money that they need, because the publisher sees this boycott and goes, holy cow, you guys, you haven't paid me anything, and this is really controversial, so I demand the money up front or I won't do it. And they don't have the money. So he gives a revelation to Joseph gives a revelation through the Lord to Martin Harris, basically telling him, hey, I know you've been philandering about with neighbors' wives, and you need to repent, and you need to, you will be more miserable than it is possible for you to comprehend if you do not follow Joseph Smith, give everything you have to the printing of the Book of Mormon, pay the printer's debt, release thyself from bondage. This, to me, is horribly manipulative and is a true, I think this is Joseph Smith. You can say he had good intentions. You can say that he was trying his best to follow the will of God, but this is too convenient. Also, there's a pattern of him selling revelation. So this was a revelation that he had in desperation so that he could save his ass, basically. He says, if nothing else will work to kind of get Martin Harris to tame himself and get on the project, then I will give him a revelation from the mouth of God himself. But there's also people, the person that brought the pounds of provisions to Joseph Smith, it says that he left with a revelation in hand. So Joseph Smith is accepting favors. He's accepting help, money, in exchange for these people feeling gratified knowing that the Lord's true prophet on the earth is giving them revelations about their life. And this is so... there's three things here that in this chapter that I've just talked about that are giving this really strong narrative that I think is strong enough evidence to conclude that, genuine or not, Joseph Smith had an ego. He was willing to lie for the... He may have been the original lie for the Lord, because it sure seems like a lot of this stuff is super, super convenient. That's all I have to say about chapter 5. Let me know if you have any thoughts. This was a great chapter. There's lots to chew on here. So I'm excited to get into chapter 6, and stay tuned. Thanks.